On this Mother's Day, times we normally might get together on Mother's Day, get together with our mothers, and that may not be possible for a lot of families. I know this. I haven't seen my mother since Christmas. I normally would have gone home after Easter, but this year, to keep her safe, especially, sometimes you have to show your love by waiting, by sacrificing for another, by not getting close, and of course the reason we can share that kind of sacrificial love is because we've experienced it in some ways ourselves, from those people, from our moms, our ability to sacrifice and to love because we have a God who has done that for us first. So I know many people are sad they cannot gather around the altar in our church, where Christ becomes present. But the truth is, wherever we love or wherever we sacrifice, there is an altar. That's an altar where Christ becomes truly present. So wherever we might be, wherever we can love, wherever we can sacrifice, wherever we can give of ourselves, there is that altar where Christ becomes present in our relationships, in our lives, in our world. That's that priesthood of the laity that everyone shares in. And on this Mother's Day, once again, that love that we have for our moms, that gives us the ability from the love that they've given to us, to love in that same way. Well, this morning I brought in something. I have a bag here filled with a dozen packages of dental floss. And I didn't buy any of these. You see, it's my mom. I try to reason with it. You ever try reasoning with a mom? Mom, New Hampshire, it's not in the third world. We have dental floss up here. I don't need a dozen packages of dental floss. I'm not a great white shark. I don't, I do floss every day. But once again, how do you reason with someone who loves you beyond reason? And I think, of course, my mom has always been like this, even before I was born. Perhaps it's the reason I was born. It seems right. After my older sister was born, my mom was told by the doctor, you won't have any more children. In fact, my mom was said to be 1 in a million odds that you'll ever have another child. But of course, you think my mom's going to listen to a doctor. She had her own in. She's being Italian. She prayed to St. Anthony. So she prays to St. Anthony. Said, hey, St. Anthony, I'll make you a deal. You've given me a daughter. If you give me a son, I'll name him after you, and you can have him as a priest. Yeah, it was sold away before birth, But anyway, but I was never pressured or anything. I was never heard the story till later. Anyway, actually, I think it was more the influence of that kind of trust and that kind of faith that was the greater influence to inspire you to live in a similar manner. And so, lo and behold, I came along, and this mother's faith and trust and prayer, and of course, when I was born, my mom said, well, I have to name him Anthony. Of course, my dad wanted me to be named after him, Raymond Joseph. And my dad said, well, I don't want my son named Tony Ball. So they ended up compromising, and now I have Anthony as my middle name, so Raymond Anthony. So, and then I also had a pretty cool nickname for a while. It was 1 in a million. Until my brother was born, then I became 2 in a million. So it's good to have people that, can step out in trust and faith, and that have that same trust and that great love. And as we all are called to, the gift that we've all had from that mother's love, from a God the Father who has that same love for us. I know, of course, I'm not the only one who's had this kind of experience, of someone, especially a mom, going above and beyond what is reasonably expected or required. They're giving expression to something deeper than themselves. They're giving witness that at the heart of reality is not scarcity, but abundance. There's a fullness. There's the very heart of God himself. And I think that's our deepest need. I don't really need a dozen packages of dental floss, but I need someone willing to give me 12 packages of dental floss. That someone who lives out of an abundance of love, a love that's not measured and weighed out, but one that it's an extravagance to it, that expresses a bigger, fuller love that is pure gift, that is pure grace. The love of a mother is more truly connected to the heart of things. We see this in nature where there's an overflowing, an abundance, a variety, a beauty. Jesus points this out. Where there's seedlings and pollen and fruits and vegetables, there's not just, things aren't just practical and utilitarian. We see this expressed in Jesus' parable of the sower, where seeds are scattered everywhere, on the good soil, on the not so good soil, on the path, on the pricker bushes. Our life is meant to bloom, to flower from that same fullness. Oftentimes, however, our life issues forth from our thoughts, our fears, our anxieties, and our worries, rather than from that presence of a loving God, of a heart from which comes forth joy and peace and love and abundance. In Mary, the Blessed Mother, is said to be full of grace. A human being come to full flower out of the abundance of God's love and grace. And our life is meant to come out of that same place, out of that same relationship. Yes, it is very important for us to use our reason and our understanding that weighs and measures. But our reason needs to be part of something bigger. It needs to be connected to and in the service of a bigger heart, a bigger life, a bigger reality, the heart of God himself, that we can trust in and surrender to. Otherwise, our calculating mind can narrow us. The extreme example of this would be someone like an Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Purely calculating and narrow, and losing that deeper part of his humanity connected to the grace and abundance of God. And in the scriptures, we see so many of these stories that contrast scarcity versus abundance. Are we living out of separation or living out of union, out of connection with others, with our God? In fact, the word diabolical actually means one who lives out of separation, as opposed to living in union, living out of connection, living out of grace, living out of gift. That's lived out of a love that's not earned, that's not deserved, that doesn't come from anything we've done, or not a reward or a transaction that can be pulled away as we stop deserving it. That's the love that our mothers have revealed to us. That's the love that Jesus reveals of the heart of the Father. That's why we can't understand often the parable about the person who only worked 1 hour and yet is paid the same as the one who worked the whole day. Because it's not based on what the worker has done. It's based on the generosity and love of the giver. It's not quid pro quo. It's not tit for tat. It's not the way. That's the way we operate. But gods and moms work differently. It's a covenant love, an unconditional love. We see this as well in the parable of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, the feeding of the 5,000. The disciples want to send the people away. There's not enough. Jesus says, feed them, love them. Trust and surrender by living out of a more abundant and more generous heart, where it's not just about calculating and weighing. There's a greater abundance there. Or the story of the woman who gives her last 2 cents. And Jesus says she gave more because she gave from her heart. Her life was part of a bigger life, a deeper connection. There's the story of the woman who anoints Jesus with expensive perfume. And Judas complains and says it's wasteful. It's coming, of course, he's coming from this miserly, meager, and stingy heart. But Jesus says, let her alone. It's because she loves much. She's been touched by grace and mercy. She's responding to the abundance that she received. When there's love, there's extravagance and excess. Not just providing the bare minimum. Not a little perfume, but a whole bottle. Not one container of dental floss, but a dozen. And Jesus says, this will prepare him for the day of his burial. Basically saying, it's a way he's experiencing the Father's love through this person that will help him to be able to trust and surrender. There's a story of the prodigal son and the father who throws him this big party, kills the fatted calf, puts rings on his fingers, throws this big celebration, and the older brother complains. It's excessive, it's undeserved, it's not merited. It doesn't make sense. He remains outside the celebration in the father's house, away from his father's house. His life is simply one of slaving away for his father, not a relationship that has changed his heart. The older brother, the prodigal son, or Judas, there's that part of us, our mind, our life, cut off from the source, from that deeper well, that deeper life, like the branch cut off from the vine. Love is always something that goes beyond expectations, beyond reason, beyond the bare minimum, the boundaries. And that way it's extravagant, excessive. We need that experience of one who loves that much to become our truest selves. One who invites us to live in that house. And that's the experience of being loved when you were nothing, when you had nothing going for you, no resume, no accomplishments, no credentials. We all need that experience. And we see the same thing now with people sacrificing themselves during this pandemic, connecting to something bigger, a bigger life, a bigger heart that brings life into the world. Not simply living from a narrow logical viewpoint. It's interesting in the gospel today as well, and Jesus says he goes to prepare a place. And he says, in my Father's home, there are many rooms. Now in the Middle East during that time, extended families lived together in the same house. So when a couple was ready to get married, the groom would build an extra room for his bride in his father's house. And then when it was ready for them, they would be married, and then he would go and take his bride to his house so they could live out of that new family, out of that new relationship. So Jesus is using that same language for his followers, of his beloved, who are now able to live their lives as he lives, as part of that connection, that family of God. And it's not meant to be simply at the end of our life, but it's right now. Father, Jesus, who gives us that same trusting relationship with the Father that he lived out of. And so when Philip says, show us the Father, and that will be enough. And the word enough actually comes from the word peace. That will give us peace. If we know we have this connection, this love of the Father. And that Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Of course, they have this great trust in Jesus, but they're not sure about this Father so much. But Jesus says, if you see me, you see the heart of the Father. You have a Father who has the same love for you. And then Thomas says, show us the way. How do we know the way? And of course, Thomas is more thinking about the what. How are we supposed to know where we're supposed to be going and what we're supposed to be doing? And Jesus says, just trust, just surrender. Jesus shows us the how. A lot of times our whats are the same. We've all, we have the way of the cross in church. We've all had those experiences like, Jesus coming before Pilate, being condemned or being judged. We've all had the experience of falling. But Jesus shows us the how. The way is the how to trust, how to surrender, how to love in the midst of that experience of our life. And so Thomas, this is the way. Jesus shows us that way. It's learning the how to live out of that deeper relationship of trust, of surrender, of letting go, of love during those difficult times. Of course, most of the time when we use the word love, we imply a separation. I love that person over there. A subject, object. When Jesus talks about love, love is recognition of a oneness that you share. That the Father and I are one. The Father loves me and I love the Father. There's a oneness, and he says, I want you to share in that, me and you and the Father. And so he invites us to live out of that abundance, that fullness. And then he says, you will do greater works than me because I go to the Father. I think any mom, any parent would say that about her children. I want my children to be having greater things, because they have this love that they can guide their life with and give them the strength and power. And that Jesus is saying, you can live on in that same love that I have from the Father. And then, of course, Mary lived out of that fullness in her own life, the fullness of grace given as a gift. And so, God is full of grace, Mary is full of grace, and our lives are supposed to be built on that same foundation of grace, of gift. And so, as we gather here as God's family to realize this wonderful gift that our God sets before us, this relationship of a loving Father that Jesus lived out of and invites us to live out of in the same way. And on this Mother's Day, we, of course, traditionally have of course, honor our moms, but we also honor our Blessed Mother. And at this time, we're going to be having our annual May crowning. And so if you have a statue or an image of Mary at home, we invite you to have it there, and you can show our honor and respect for Mary and for that disposition of life that Mary reveals to us. She's the archetype, she's the image of what the church is meant to be in its relationship to God. So at this time, we'll have our May crowning.